Absolutely. I mean, the one thing we can be sure about is the future will be different from the past. That's about the only thing we can be certain about, but there's high uncertainty about how things are going to evolve into the future with respect to agricultural land use. We can take a few pointers from the past to give us some indication of what might happen. We probably know that population will increase. That seems a fairly reasonable assumption to make. And if we continue with the past trends of the countries of the world becoming economically better off, then we know that dietary changes will also become more important with shifts to meat production. So those are some of the issues that are going to happen, which are going to affect the demand side for food production. So population changes and dietary changes will affect how much food we need to grow on the Earth's surface to feed that population. But we can also look at the supply side of food production, and that's clearly going to change as well. So the supply side is basically how productive is the land that we use to produce that food. And there are a number of important drivers that will affect the supply side in the future. For example, climate change will have a major influence on the productivity of individual crops, but also the geographic distribution of where those crops are going to be grown. So for example, a drier climate scenario would make the production of pasture and livestock in some areas less viable than it is now. So that could be a really important factor. It could be, in many cases, a negative impact. It could reduce food production. In other parts of the world, it could actually have a positive effect. So parts of the world which are currently limited by temperatures could see some benefits of productivity increases with a change in the climate. Associated with that is the effect of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So one of the few things we could be fairly certain about when discussing future climate change is that emissions of carbon dioxide have steadily increased in the atmosphere. And we know also that that has a fertilization effect on plants. So the more carbon dioxide you have in the atmosphere, the greater the productivity of crop production. So elevated CO2s, perversely, whilst it has a negative effect on the global climate, could also have a positive effect on the supply side of food production. The other factor which is immensely important, which we've seen in the past, we've gone through in the last 40 or 50 years a period known as the Green Revolution, where the capacity of agriculture to supply food has greatly been enhanced by technological development. So that meant the increased use of nitrogenous fertilizers, the increased use of machinery such as tractors and harvesting equipment, the increased use of agrochemicals, pesticides and herbicides. So that's meant in many cases, if you look at the context within Europe, for example, over the last 50 to 60 years, there's been something like a 3 or 4-fold increase in crop yields over that period of time. It's slightly different between different crops, but that's the general trend. So it's been immensely important in the past, and it's likely that in the future we will see, again, increases in the use of technology to increase food production. Some of those are controversial. It could involve things like genetically modified crops, using gene technology. It could involve, as in the past, traditional crop breeding approaches. It could also involve smarter agricultural practices such as precision farming, which allows the use of chemical fertilizers or pesticides to be more finely or more attuned to the needs of crop production. So there's a whole range of different processes we can see unfolding there. The other issues is that we might also in the future start seeing increases in the demand for other types of protein sources. So a notable example of this at the moment is the production of insects. So insects are actually very, very good at converting biomass into protein biomass, much more efficient than traditional livestock such as pigs and cows. So it could be in the future, if people's preferences for different types of protein sources perhaps change. Of course, that's going to depend very strongly on consumption preferences of society, but insects might be an alternative protein source in the future, which means we would need less land to produce an equivalent quantity of protein than we do currently. So lots of things to think about here. The other thing in terms of the sort of social issues and social pressures that are really important with respect to sustainability issues is the ways in which we think about how much food we consume. So traditionally, I think people in the past think of the biggest food supply issue as being malnourishment, people who have insufficient calories to subsist. But in fact, these days, a large problem actually is obesity. So there's something like 3 times the number of obese people globally today than there are malnourished people globally. So in fact, one of the issues here is not about how much food we actually produce, it's about social inequality in the distribution chain and how we supply different populations, societies of the world with the food that's available. So again, that's going to be an issue that we'll need to address in the future in terms of sustainability, is how we reduce those inequalities in the supply side.